The sky was gray that morning, as if even the weather understood what I was about to lose. My grandfather's funeral was held in the small cemetery just outside the town, where old trees leaned over cracked stones and the wind always sounded like a whisper from the past. People gathered slowly, dressed in black, speaking in low voices, pretending to be strong, while grief quietly broke them inside. But for me, there was only one truth. My grandfather was gone. He wasn't just family. He was the only person who ever made me feel seen. While my parents were busy chasing status, money, and appearances, he was the one who asked me about my dreams. He was the one who believed I could become something more than what they expected. When I was small, he would sit beside me and say, "One day, you will stand where no one can push you down." I didn't fully understand those words back then, but I remembered them now standing in front of his coffin. The wooden casket lay surrounded by white flowers, the scent of lilies mixed with cold air, heavy and suffocating. I stood a few steps away from my parents. They didn't look at me, not once. It was like I was already invisible to them. Relatives whispered behind hands. Some looked at me with pity, others with judgment, as if they were waiting for something to happen. And then it did. My mother suddenly stepped forward, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. "This is all because of you," she said loudly. Everyone turned. My chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. She pointed at me as if I was some kind of stain on the family name. "You think we don't know? You've been trying to manipulate your grandfather for his inheritance. You poisoned his mind against us." My heart dropped. "That's not true," I said quickly. "I never—" My father stepped in beside her, his face cold, almost disgusted. "Stop lying. You think we don't know how you clung to him, always acting innocent." The words didn't make sense. My grandfather was gone, and yet they were attacking me as if I had taken something from them. People started murmuring. The funeral was no longer peaceful. It was turning into something ugly. "I loved him," I said, my voice breaking. "He was the only one who ever cared about me." That was when my mother snapped. "Don't you dare say that," she shouted. "You are not the victim here. You've always been a burden, always weak, always unwanted." The words hit harder than any physical blow. My vision blurred, but I refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. I took a step toward the coffin, needing just one moment with him. Just one final goodbye. But my father blocked me. "You don't deserve to stand there," he said quietly. Then my mother did something I will never forget. She pushed me back. Not hard enough to knock me down, but hard enough to make a point. A statement, a public humiliation. Gasps echoed through the crowd. "You are no longer our son," she said coldly. "From this moment, you are nothing to us." The world froze. I stood there trembling, staring at them as if they were strangers wearing my parents' faces. My grandfather's coffin was just a few steps away, but it felt like 1,000 miles. No one moved to help me. No one spoke up. And then I understood something painful but clear. This wasn't just grief. This was rejection. Final and deliberate, I slowly looked toward my grandfather one last time. My chest burned, my throat tightened, but I didn't fall. Not then, because deep inside, I heard his voice again. "One day, you will stand where no one can push you down." I turned away from the coffin, from the flowers, from the family that had erased me in seconds, and I walked out of the cemetery alone. I remember the moment I left the cemetery more clearly than anything else in my life. It wasn't dramatic. No one stopped me. No one called my name. The wind simply followed me down the narrow road, carrying the sound of distant prayers fading behind me. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of exhaustion, but because of what I had just become. An orphan while my parents were still alive. I had nothing with me except a small backpack I had brought for the funeral. Inside it was a black shirt, a few documents, a little cash my grandfather had once quietly given me for emergencies, and a phone that suddenly felt useless in a world where no one would answer me anymore. I stayed in a cheap roadside guest room that night. The walls were cracked, the fan rattled like it was struggling to survive, and the bed smelled like dust and old pain. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's finger pointing at me, my father's cold face, and my grandfather's coffin standing between love and abandonment. The next morning, reality hit harder. I had no home to return to. When I tried calling my mother, she blocked me. My father did the same. Even relatives who once smiled at me avoided my calls. It was as if I had been erased from the family record overnight. For days, I wandered between cheap rooms and street cafes, trying to figure out what to do next. I applied for jobs wherever I could. Shops, warehouses, delivery services. Most places rejected me immediately once they saw I had no permanent address or references. At night, I sometimes sat alone near the bus station, watching people come and go with families waiting for them. I would ask myself what I had done wrong, but deep down, I already knew the answer: nothing. I was simply not useful to them anymore. On the 7th day after the funeral, I got my first job. A small grocery store hired me to stock shelves and clean floors. The pay was barely enough to eat, but I accepted without hesitation. Pride had no place in my life anymore. The owner, an old man with tired eyes, once asked me, "You look like someone who lost everything. Am I right?" I didn't answer at first. Then I nodded. He didn't ask more. He just said, "Then start again. That's all you can do." Those words stayed with me longer than any insult I had ever received. Months passed, then years. I worked during the day, studied at night, and slept in small rented rooms that changed every few months. My hands grew rough, my body tired. But something inside me slowly hardened, not into bitterness, but into determination. Still, there were nights I broke down. Nights when I wondered why my grandfather had to leave me alone in a world where even family could turn so cruel. I would sit by the window, staring at the dark sky, whispering things I never said out loud. "I miss you. I'm trying. Please don't let me become like them." And strangely, those moments didn't weaken me. They built me. One day, while working at a warehouse, I overheard something that stopped me cold. Two managers were talking about a property dispute involving my grandfather's name. My heart raced as I listened carefully. Pieces of information I was never supposed to hear began falling together. My grandfather had left something behind for me, but it had never reached me. My parents had buried it, just like they buried my place in their lives. That night I didn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't because of pain. It was because something inside me had shifted. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't just feel lost. I felt awake. 7 years don't heal everything, but they change what kind of person you become when the pain stops breaking you and starts building you instead. By the time I realized it, I was no longer the same boy who stood frozen at my grandfather's funeral. That version of me, confused, helpless, dependent on people who discarded him, had slowly disappeared in the long, silent years that followed. What replaced him was someone else entirely, someone they never imagined I could become. It started quietly. After leaving the warehouse job, I didn't stop working. I learned everything I could: logistics, supply chains, basic accounting from free night classes, and later, business operations from online resources. I wasn't gifted with opportunity. I created it from exhaustion, repetition, and refusal to quit. Every time I felt like giving up, I remembered the cemetery. I remembered the cold words, "You are no longer our son." That sentence became fuel. I moved cities twice. Then again, I took risks that scared me, worked under people who underestimated me, and slowly climbed into roles that gave me more responsibility. I learned how money moved, how businesses failed, and how power quietly shifted between people who understood systems and those who only followed them. At first, I earned little, then enough, then more than I ever thought possible. By year 4, I was managing operations for a mid-sized logistics firm. By year 5, I had built connections in investment circles. I wasn't famous, I wasn't loud, but I was becoming someone whose decisions mattered. And I made sure of one thing: I never told anyone from my past who I had become. Not yet, because I still remembered them too clearly. Meanwhile, I began noticing something strange whenever I occasionally searched old family names out of curiosity. I refused to admit I still had. My parents' world wasn't stable anymore. The business my father once bragged about had started collapsing under debt. My mother's social circle had thinned. The same relatives who once stood silently at the funeral were now distant, avoiding association. Time had not been kind to them. It was almost ironic. The people who once called me nothing were now struggling to hold on to what they had. One evening, I received a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer at first. It rang again and again. Finally, I picked up. A distant cousin's voice came through, nervous and hesitant. "They're looking for you," he said. I stayed silent. "Your parents, they've been asking about you everywhere." I almost laughed. After 7 years of silence, after erasing me like I never existed, they suddenly remembered I was alive. But I said nothing. Instead, I continued building, because something had changed inside me the day I learned about my grandfather's hidden legacy. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about truth, about what had been taken from me, not just emotionally, but legally, deliberately. I hired a lawyer quietly, then a second one. Piece by piece, documents started revealing a story I had never been allowed to see. Transfers, signatures, missing files. My grandfather's name tied to assets that had never been disclosed to me. Everything pointed in one direction. My parents didn't just disown me. They erased my future. But what they didn't understand was simple. They thought they were destroying me. Instead, they were building the version of me that would eventually stand in front of them without needing their approval, their fear, or their permission. By year 7, I was no longer surviving. I was in control. I had assets, partnerships, and financial independence strong enough that my name quietly appeared in industry circles they would never have access to. I didn't chase revenge openly. I didn't need to, because success, when built slowly and silently, has a way of reaching people who once believed you were nothing. And soon, I knew, it would reach them too. I just didn't expect how soon they would come crawling back. The call came on a quiet evening. I was sitting in my apartment, nothing extravagant, but calm, organized, and entirely mine. The kind of place I once thought I'd never have when I was sleeping in cheap rooms and eating whatever I could afford. Outside, the city lights flickered softly through the window. Inside, there was silence, the kind of silence I had fought years to earn. My phone rang, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up anyway. "Hello," I said. There was a pause, a shaky breath on the other end. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 7 years. My mother. For a second, I didn't respond, not because I didn't recognize her, but because I did. Her voice was different now. No sharpness, no authority, just uncertainty and something close to fear. Are you there? She asked carefully. I leaned back in my chair. You called me. Silence again. Then she spoke faster, as if afraid I would hang up. We need to talk. Please, it's important. That word, please, felt unfamiliar coming from her. I stayed quiet. Then my father's voice came through the line, taking the phone from her. We made mistakes, he said flatly. Not an apology, not yet. Just an opening. I almost smiled. After 7 years, that was their beginning. He continued, things aren't difficult right now. Business debts, loans, pressure from creditors. We need help. I already knew where this was going. I just didn't interrupt. Then my mother's voice returned softer now. We need $300,000. The number hung in the air like it didn't belong in reality. Not please forgive us, not we were wrong, not even we miss you, just $300,000. For a moment, I said nothing. I let the silence grow heavy enough for them to feel it. Then I asked quietly, why me? Another pause. My father cleared his throat. You're successful now, we heard things. People say you're doing well, you can help your family. Family. That word again. The same people who stood at a coffin and erased me in front of strangers were now asking for help like nothing had happened. My mother added quickly, we raised you, we gave you everything. I laughed once, not loud, not emotional, just enough to interrupt her sentence. Everything. That word was almost insulting now. I stood up and walked toward the window, watching the city below. The same world that once ignored me was now the world I moved through with confidence. I remember something differently, I said calmly. They went silent. I continued, my voice steady. I remember being disowned at a funeral. I remember being told I was nothing. I remember standing alone while you buried me with him. No one spoke. For the first time, they had no response ready. My mother's voice cracked slightly. We were angry back, then it was grief. It was, stop, I said quietly. That single word cut through everything. Silence again. Then I said, you didn't lose me. You chose to erase me. My father tried again, weaker this time. We're still your parents. I turned back toward the room, my reflection faint in the glass. No, I said. You were. A long silence followed. On the other end, I could hear breathing, uneasy, broken. The people who once stood tall over me were now searching for something they couldn't control anymore. Finally, my mother whispered, so you won't help us? I let that question sit between us. 7 years ago, I walked out of a cemetery with nothing. Today, I stood in a life I built from the ground up without them. Without their approval, without their name. I'll tell you my answer, I said slowly, then I paused, not out of confusion, out of certainty. You taught me something important. I continued. That love without respect doesn't survive, and family without dignity doesn't deserve loyalty. I could hear her breathing faster now. I added, you asked for $300,000. Another pause, then I said the words that ended everything, but I think what you're really asking for is forgiveness you never earned, and I ended the call. The room returned to silence, but this time it wasn't empty. It was final.